Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's live market update. John Pasalis from Realosophy Realty. For those of you who are new to our update, I like hosting these sessions once a month to take a bit more of a deep dive into what's happening in the housing market, condo market, look at some of the stats, but also some of the trends we're seeing on the ground. We have this week, this month, we have Anastasia and Davin from our sales team to talk about some of the dynamics we're seeing with our clients, with other agents we're working with, and of course, chat a little bit about some of the macro trends with David Larock. This month, in addition to the market update and stats, I'm going to take a look at some stats for micro condos versus large condos versus houses to help people understand that even in the same area, we have very different dynamics going on. People think about sort of the housing market as this big thing, it's all slow. But even within the same geography, we can have very different dynamics happening. I'm going to chat a little bit about an article in the Globe about lowball offers and consumer confidence and business confidence, and then we'll kind of bring on Dave or Davin and Anastasia, and then eventually David Larock. So as always, if you have questions, please post them in the chat. We have Urmi Desai from Move Smartly joining us, who's going to moderate. So please post them in the chat. And of course, as we go through, we're going to answer your questions. One thing I'll say before we kick off, I mentioned, I think in a previous session, that I had started a private info session walking through how to upsize in this uncertain market. It's a very tough market for people who need to upsize. And by that, I mean, of course, buying and selling two homes kind of at the same time. So I walk through some of the things that people need to be mindful of when they're thinking about, should I buy first, should I sell first, and then what are the risks and how to mitigate the risks. So if you're interested in that, I'll try to put a link in the show notes below. Otherwise, shoot me an email at askjohn@movesmartly.com. Just put the subject line as Upsize, and I'll send you a link to that info session as well. So we're going to move on to the stats. We're going to kind of quickly fly through them so we can chat a little bit more about some of the interesting things on the market. But March was the slowest sales volume for the month of March and basically in 30 years, pretty much. So when we look at all the home sales in the Greater Toronto area for the month of March and we compare it to previous Marches, it's the lowest. And we can kind of see this if we look at detached home sales, 2155 is the number of detached home sales last month. It's half of the 10-year average. Of course, during the bubble and the peak, there were about 7,500 detached home sales in the GTA. So that's well above the 10-year average. But this is the lowest volume going back to 1997 is kind of what we have data for. And I'm probably even the previous years before that. So pretty much a 30-year low. An unbelievably soft market. And again, I think some of the dynamics between detached and condos are a bit different. A lot of people with detached are basically needs to upsize, and it is a tricky and challenging market to upsize in for the reasons I said. Timing to transactions is more challenging when you're worried about if your home's going to sell. And on top of that, there's a lot of economic uncertainty that's pushed a lot of people to the sidelines. So this is driving sales down. And it is a sluggish market for detached homes and for condominiums, which we'll look at shortly. When we look at the number of new listings, about 7,500, that's pretty much in line with the 10-year average. It's up 30% over last year, but I'd say relatively normal volume of new listings. When we look at active listings, they're actually quite high. I mean, we are up 130, more than double over last year. So 130% increase in the number of active listings. People don't realize the first few months of 2024 was actually a relatively busy market. It was a bit competitive. There were more multiple offers. And again, sales were a little bit better last year, but also inventory is a lot lower. And that's what made the market more competitive. Now inventory is up 130%. So things are a lot slower. And again, inventory is piling up largely because sales are pulling back significantly. When we look at the months of inventory that looks at these, 10,000 homes roughly that are on the market divided by the number of sales, This is just detached, but when we look at all low rise, we're at just about 4.5 months of inventory. So it's pretty quiet market. It's well above what we typically have in the GTA. So it's pretty slow, but prices are sticking somewhat. Average prices are down 3% year over year. So it's the second month in a row where average and median prices are down single digits, 3 to 4%. And average prices last month were at 1.335. Now, we look at the condo market, similar, slightly different dynamics. Condos, about 1,400 sales, not quite a 30 plus year average, but certainly the lowest in about 15 years. So very soft sales volumes again. But the big difference with condos is that new listings were at their highest level ever for the month of March, 5,500. The 10-year average is 4,000, but even more significant than the new listings is the active listings volume at about 8,700, up 50% over last year and well above the 10-year average, like highest volume for the month of March in history. So we're seeing a ton of inventory. That's driving months of inventory up to about 6.5, and average prices also for condos down, modestly about 3% at about 708,000. So prices, and people keep asking why we're seeing so much inventory, but prices are sticky and stable. This is kind of normal. When the prices crashed in the GTA in 2017 and 2021, it was because people got caught in two transactions. The market turned very quickly. They became distressed sellers, and prices fell 20% in 4 months. That's not typical. That happened because the market turned on a dime, sentiment turned on a dime, and people who bought needed to sell. And like I said, were caught in two transactions. Now the market is quiet and slow, and the way housing markets slow down and prices fall typically in this type of environment is slowly, gradually. If you read a lot of papers, they talk about house prices being sticky on the way down, and that just means that they're very slow to decline because sellers are stubborn. They'll wait longer for their price, and in many cases, condo owners are just deciding to rent them. Rather than sell for less than what they think they want to get or what their units were. So this is why prices have been slow to adjust. But again, we're starting to see a little bit down 3-4% over last year for 2 months in a row. Now, one thing I wanted to do is take a quick look at differences within the condo market, so small units versus larger units, and then look at what is going on with houses in the same area. And I think this is helpful to understand, again, because people read the headlines, but headlines don't tell the entire story. There are micro trends and dynamics that I think are important. And it's important to think about this, whether you're a buyer, whether you're a seller, right? How you want to capitalize on the market. If you're a buyer, which market is slower, where you have more leverage. And as a seller, to be more mindful of what your expectations should be depending on the type of property you're selling and how realistic your pricing is. So what I decided to do was basically look at the market downtown. So for people familiar with MLS boundaries, this is C1 and C8. So this is the downtown core. This is south of Bloor, as far west as Roncesvalles, pretty much. I mean, just before Roncesvalles, um, to Parkdale, and then east all the way to the Don Valley and south to the lake. So this is kind of the main downtown core. Where most of most kind of condos are sort of centered around this area. And what I wanted to do is look at the market for small condos under 599 square feet. Look for condos that are slightly larger, maybe about 900 to 1,400. See what the different dynamics are for there, and then look at the market for houses all in this same area, so same geography. So when we look at the number of units on the market for small condos under 599 square feet, right now, just literally as about 20 minutes ago, there are about 960 active units, active condos for sale that are small. And in the past 30 days, 95 units have sold. And this means we have about 10 months of inventory for small units under 599 square feet. Now, when we look at the same geography and I say, okay, show me the number of condos available for sale that are between 900 and 1,400 square feet, they're, of course, larger, usually two-bedroom units. The numbers are a bit different. We have 420 active listings and we've had 70 sales over the past 30 days. And that means we have about 6 months of inventory. That means that this market's moving a little bit better than the market for small condos. There's not as much inventory relative to the sales, so things are selling more quickly. So if you have a small unit, it's going to take you a lot longer to sell than if you have a slightly larger unit. So even again, within the condo market, we have these two very different dynamics going on with larger units relative to smaller units. Now, if we go one step further and we look at what is going on in the low-rise market, so this is houses, and I didn't filter by square footage because with, I mean, houses, it's usually they don't even advertise them with square footage. So I just looked at all the homes available for sale, south of Bloor in the exact same area. And there are 187 active listings. 52 homes have sold in that same area over the past 30 days, which results in about 3.5 months of inventory. So again, very, very different dynamic. This market is a little bit tighter, less oversupplied. Homes are selling a lot faster. And if we go back and we think of the months of inventory for houses as a whole, for the GTA, we had about 4.5 months of inventory for houses, which means even when we're comparing the same type of home, which is low-rise homes, this downtown neighborhood is more undersupplied relative to other neighborhoods. I mean, meaning it's kind of performing a little bit better. So there are differences between the types of homes, between geographies, and I think it's very important when you're buying and you're selling to be mindful of these differences. Everything isn't the same. And this is why, we have some clients who are looking in some urban neighborhoods and homes are getting multiple offers. And like, what the hell's going on? The news is about the market's tanking, there's low sales. And yeah, okay, that is what's going on in the GTA. But some regions, some municipalities, some neighborhoods, I should say, in the core and certain price points are still getting a lot of offers and they're selling pretty quickly. And some are getting 5, 10 offers, surprisingly. And it's not that they're crazy, it's just that these homes are a little bit more competitive. So they're not sitting on the market quite as long. So I hope that makes sense. Like I said, if anyone has any questions about this as we go on, please post them. But it's important to be mindful of some of these differences across the GTA. There's a great article in the Globe about sellers getting lowball offers. Again, a lot of buyers testing sellers to see how flexible they are, how motivated they are. And the article is interesting because they're talking about how, in most cases, just sellers are just refusing to lower their price. And, they'll get a lowball offer the first week or two, they'll stick it out, and eventually they kind of get the price they want. But again, I think all of this is a function of how motivated the sellers are. If people have owned their homes a long time, they're not over leveraged, they don't need to sell, they're going to wait. And the people who are making the lowballs are just testing to see how motivated and flexible the seller is. From my experience, that is a strategy that works a little bit better after a home's been on the market for a while. To be sending out lowball offers when a home's been on the market for under a week usually isn't very effective. Like usually most sellers will at least wait a little bit before adjusting their expectations down. But again, it's a sign of a shifting market. You don't typically see headlines of lowball offers. And again, some people are trying to do that to try to potentially take advantage of a slower market. And it can work if you're looking at a home that has been on the market for a while in a slower area where things are sitting. It could be a strategy that works. Some agents are reluctant to go with lowballs because they're worried they're going to get yelled at by the listing agent. But again, I think and they're not used to making lowball offers. But I think in this market, I think as agents, we have to, do what is in our client's best interest. And if it's a strategy we think might work, to go with it. So before I bring on Anastasia and Davin, I wanted to briefly chat about the chaos, the Trump chaos that we're seeing. And of course, David Larock's going to share his thoughts on this. We're seeing obviously all sorts of things. They announced their tariffs. They announced that they're not backing down on them. And then, a few days ago, they said they're doing a 90-day pause. All of this is uncertainty. And I've talked about this over the past couple of months, that it is the uncertainty that is really killing the housing market right now. This is why sales are so low. If we look at, and this is a chart from Ben Rabideau, who was on our show last week or 2 weeks ago, showing business or index of consumer confidence from the Conference Board of Canada. And consumer confidence is at its lowest level in over 20 years, you know, and they, of course, have different ways of measuring how confident people are about their economy, about their jobs, about prices, about all of these things. And it is at the lowest level. It's actually below the lows of COVID. It's below the lows of the global financial crisis. So consumer confidence has not been lower based on their index. And I think we see this reflected in people's behavior, people moving to the sideline, people are reluctant to upsize. And again, I think this is important. And on top of that, when we look at business confidence, this is from the I think Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses, also from Ben Rabideau. It is also the lowest it's ever been. Businesses are anxious. They don't want to invest. They don't know what tariffs are going to be like. And I think the key takeaway, I think, with this is that the housing market's not going to return to some version of normal until consumer confidence is back. And I think I see all sorts of realtors talking about, oh, rates will be lower, people are going to rush in. I think we've talked about this last month with David Larock, that this lower rate environment is going to be very different from the low rate environments we had during COVID and during the global financial crisis. If we get lower rates this time around, it's because the economy is really quite terrible. And at the end of the day, if consumer confidence is in the gutter, it doesn't matter how low rates go. You're not going to rush out and buy a house or an investment property because you're worried about your job, you're worried about your income. So this is an important metric that we need to be mindful of. We need to see consumer confidence come back before we see much of a recovery in the housing market. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen actually and bring on Davin and Anastasia to chat a little bit about some of the things that they're seeing on the ground. And as they come in, maybe I'll mention kind of a video I did recently on Instagram, talking about how a lot of buyers these days or buyer agents are kind of acting like the market is like 2021. You know, they have a client who's interested, so they write up an offer and just submit it. And, you know, my video is like, this is the opposite of what you should be doing. Like in this market, you need to be calling the listing agent before you make an offer, because the listing agent sometimes will spill the beans. They'll tell you everything. They'll tell you that they're getting no showings. They're going to tell you that the seller's desperate, that they need to sell. They bought another home. They're anxious. They'll tell you what price they'll take. And not all agents, don't get me wrong, the best agents will never do that. And there are a lot of absolute professionals in the industry. Maybe 10 or 15% of all agents are great and they would never do that. But some, I mean, most are not that great. Most are desperate for a deal. Most are anxious that their seller clients yelling at them, and they'll just tell you everything. And in this market, when we're representing buyers, you need all the information possible. So this is a change, of course, from the dynamic that we're used to seeing in the GTA from 4 years ago, where everything was getting multiple. So on that, Davin, I'll pass it to you. I don't know kind of what you've been seeing in terms of the market, in terms of strategies, things like that when it comes to dealing with clients on the ground.
Sure. I'll kind of just play off what you were talking about there. You know, a recent sale that I had. Am I frozen?
No, you're good.
Okay, someone is. Anyway, a recent sale that I had. So this is on us being on the listing side and dealing with a buyer and buyer agent. And by all accounts, he was, you know, wonderful throughout as far as like communication before the actual offer. Just dealing with him was quite nice. But coming to the end, to the finish line, I think is where some mistakes were kind of made. And this mostly stems from how you approach the final visit to make sure that the house that you bought is, you know, as it should be. All the things that are there or should be there are there. And everything that should be working is in fact working. We did leave the house, the sellers did, in, you know, the appropriate condition. Everything that should have been there was in fact there. But we know some things do operate in a gray area in terms of like fixtures and chattels and that kind of thing. And I think where the first mistake was made is if you're not sure about a specific furniture item that you might construe to be a fixture, put it in your offer, right? Things like you know, dressers or bookshelves that are, yes, they are fixed with like a security little piece of nylon. Some, you know, might say it's a fixture. Some say that is not a fixture. To me, that is just simply furniture with a, you know, a piece of safety, you know, equipment attached to it. So they had some trouble there. And then, of course, after they in fact close the property, they come back with all these additional little items. A light switch was just kind of working funny, or an awning was working. It was working, but it wasn't working to their liking. Just things like that. So I think for agents, you have to approach these things. First of all, don't do your final visit the day before closing. You need some time to actually mitigate little problems that you might have.
Yeah.
And when issues do arise, bring them up right away. Don't bring them up, on hour 9 before closing, because you're just not gonna have time to get anything done. So that was, I guess, my little bit of dealing with different buyer agents and how things should or shouldn't be done. And again, he was great, but then at the end, just could have done things a little bit differently to maybe help out his clients.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. Things like wardrobes, IKEA wardrobe, like a lot of people assume things are staying. They're not always staying, obviously. So you're right. If you're representing buyers, you always want to have that stuff. So
and it seems small, like they're not terribly expensive, but when you're buying a $1 million home, it's just kind of it's just kind of a bummer to think you were going to have this bookshelf, this or that, and it's not there. So
that's awesome. Anastasia, what are you seeing?
Well, I want to talk actually about what you said about agents need to pick up the phone and call listing agents before drafting an offer. I had a great story. Home came on the market listed for 2.3 million with an offer date. So we looked at it. I did my analysis. I figured the value is around high 2.4 million. So I called the listing agent, just wanted to get some information about the house. And I thought to check if my analysis is aligned with the seller's expectation, just to double check, And well, first of all, what stood out is that she told me that she's thankful that I called being prepared, because she said a lot of agents call her without looking at the comparables, and they just ask what are the seller's expectations. And I actually was able to discuss the comparables with her one by one. And based on our conversation, she basically in the end frankly told me that if her clients were to get 2.5, they would take it as a bully in no time. So what's interesting, the same evening, they get a bully offer with 2 hours irrevocable. And just within an hour, she sends everyone a note that the offer is accepted. In my mind, I'm thinking, oh my God, what is it they got that she accepted it so quickly? Like, we didn't even have a chance, quite frankly, like to open the computer and draft an offer. And when I called her, she said she already had it drafted, hence obviously it's 2.65. And I'm thinking, oh my God, did that agent who bought this house, did they even call her? Because they would know that they were willing to take much less. And so that's a kind of lesson that
it's kind of nuts. I mean, and what you said, I mean, it's worth unpacking. Like, no, so in a situation like this where you're calling and trying to get the sellers and their agents' expectations is sometimes helpful, because if their expectations are unrealistic and we have clients, like it's like you can avoid that one and go with something else. So that's why we do it. But to a further point, like you said, I mean, she basically told you they take 2.5. And like, you got to imagine this buyer now paid 150 grand more than they needed to because they just didn't call up the listing agent. And this is what I'm talking about. And the listing agent, to be clear in this situation, didn't do anything wrong. It's different. It's a different scenario when the listing agent is like, my client will take way under asking and they're desperate and whatever. That's a different scenario, right? In this scenario, she's just being more realistic and honest about their expectations. I mean, would I disclose what price we're willing to take in a bully? Probably not. But it's not like this terrible thing that the listing agent did. But from the buyer's perspective, that buyer who paid 2.65 probably overpaid by 150 grand because their agent didn't pick up the phone. It's exactly what I'm talking about. It's exactly what I was talking about in that video. Yeah.
Well, and in addition to all of that, that home had a parking that was not legal. And now seeing that how they overpaid clearly without a phone call to an agent, I wonder if they even did their due diligence and checked that the front pad was not legal. I actually called the city, and the city told me they cannot confirm that you can make it legal. There are some contingencies. So
I mean, and probably not when you're making a bully offer with 2 hours irrevocable. Again, like this is the downside. Like people are acting like it's 2021. Like you gotta the things are on. And yes, some homes are busy, some markets are busy, But to like go in so aggressively, to not do your due diligence potentially on parking, they probably didn't if they're going at 265. They're rushing in, they're paying way more than they need to. It's like, and again, I feel for people because I don't know, it's like the agent is pushing them and pressuring them to go overly aggressive. I don't know, but
But
that's
I
a
think, yeah, so sales like this, they actually confusing buyers on the ground because,
big deal.
the market is slow and all of a sudden you get this aggressive sold price.
Yeah, but then we see them. I mean, I think when we see them, we
Yeah.
have clients and we look at those comparables. I think we consider them outliers. We're like they overpaid,
Yeah.
quite frankly,
Yep.
right? Wow. Anyhow, well, that's a wild story. Mr. Anything else you guys want to share, Davin, Anastasia, any other?
Well, as far as like the market being confusing and whatnot, I think it's interesting to me that there's actually a good amount of choice out there for buyers, and maybe people are glossing over certain houses for various reasons. That is fine. Of course, it's a big purchase, but just in like the map you showed of C1 and C8, if you just kind of expand that out a little bit west to like W1, W2,
Yeah.
I think actually I wrote it down. Where is it? Yeah, here we go. So in the 2+ bed space, you've got 55 listings that are active. 45 of those are 3+ bed, and a fair amount are actually they're decent. They're nice enough homes. Some are sure they need a lot of work, but some are perfectly reasonable to move right into. And of those, I think 26 of them are 10+ days on market, which means those are open for negotiations. Some of the ones that are previously days on market might be, but some of those might be set up for an offer date.
Yeah.
So like there's things you can kind of do out there, and if you move that sort of similar geographic area and plop it on the east side, E1, 2, and 3, and kind of cut out O'Connor Parkview, it's just like a different kettle of fish up there. You got 105 2+ beds. You've got 63 of which are 3+, and 44 of those are 10 days plus on market. And an even greater swath of those are nice move-in type of homes. And by the way, these are all price points of 1.5 and below.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, 1.3 and below.
Yeah.
So, yes, is that a lot of money? Sure. But in the grand scheme of Toronto real estate, that's in the realm of reasonable, approachable. So
And
I think
those areas,
those are areas that people like. They have similar amenities, similar, approximation downtown. And, the schools might be different in various spots, but for the most part, they're perfectly fine.
Yeah, and those areas are typically pretty competitive. And I think what's happening now is like the ones that are getting the most offers are really the cherry-picked homes. It's like the ones that hit a lot of check boxes in a certain price point or certain design or certain finishes. And a lot of other homes that are good but weren't renovated a year ago or renovated 10 years ago or 15 years ago just sit on the market a little longer. So yeah, super interesting.
I also want to add that buyers can actually still get value even on offer nights. And that happened actually just recently with one of the homes where they received 5 offers. And after I called the agent just to get a sense of what were I knew the sold price, and I just wanted to get more information about what other offers was. And she told me that the offer they accepted was actually not the highest offer. But this was the only offer out of 5 that came with a bank draft. And I was shocked to hear that. Yeah, and I was shocked because, if it's an offer night, you almost like want to have your bank draft along with your offer to make your offer stronger. And I was shocked to find out that out of 5, only 1 had a draft along with the offer. And so the seller, being uncertain about the market, about all the tariffs, was very anxious and decided to accept the offer that has a bank draft along with it, and everyone else.
And even though it's lower than the top offer?
It was the second highest offer. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I'm going to unpack that quickly for everybody because it might be a little bit inside baseball for everyone. So on our when we make an offer on the offer nights at homes, multiple offers, right? Obviously, the seller's looking at price, conditions, all of these things. But one of the things they look for is, does the buyer have their deposit on hand? Because that way, if they accept our client's offer, for example, we deliver the deposit, which is roughly 5% of the purchase price. They have it that night, the home is sold. Okay. Yep. The concern that sellers sometimes have is, okay, if they accept the highest offer that doesn't have the deposit, and the buyer says we're just going to go to the bank tomorrow, what happens if that buyer gets cold feet and says, you know what, I kind of changed my mind. I don't really want to buy this house. I'm feeling very anxious. Terrible news headlines the next day and backs out. Now, technically, that buyer's still on the hook and bound to that agreement if it was firm. But the thing that usually binds someone to the agreement is the deposit. You know, if they have skin in the game that's locked in, if they haven't delivered the deposit, the seller would need to sue potentially. And like most sellers don't want to do that. So what typically happens is they just say, okay, forget about it. Now we're going to redo our offer night. So it leads to a lot of uncertainty for the seller, especially if they want to know that their property is going to sell and sell firm, to make sure no one's going to, walk away from the deal. And this is a good example is sometimes in an uncertain market, sellers will take less money if you're just more prepared, if you have your bank draft on hand and willing to deliver it that night. But it's interesting how, 4 out of the 5 basically aren't really prepared. You know what I mean? So another good story.
And if I can add to that, because you mentioned, the seller might get the buyer might wake up, get cold feet. Another thing that could happen that's unbeknownst to them is they go to, let's say it's a Tangerine account or Wealthsimple account, and they weren't prepped beforehand that you might need some time to make this money actually liquid. The seller or the buyer, while they want to give the deposit, they can't. Have to wait 2-3 business days to actually, get to that money, access that money. So another thing buyer agents should do is, find out where's your deposit coming from and make sure it's actually accessible when it does come time to offer.
Yeah. And the deposit's one thing. I mean, I've had clients who will take less money if the buyer doesn't have a home to sell versus an offer that is higher, and the higher priced offer needs to sell their current house or condo, because that presents more uncertainty. What if that higher price can't sell their home or they can't sell their condo? So there are all sorts of things that influence people's decisions. It's not just about price in this market. And I think, again, going back to Anastasia's point, this is why it's so important you got to call agents. I don't know what it is. Like, people don't like picking up the phone anymore. I find when we're listing, it's like you'll have 5 offers and no one calls you. They just text you or email you. And people do. And this is the most important thing about calling. I mean, I'm going to wrap up now before we go to the questions. Why I said in that anecdote at the beginning, why we need to call people, because no agent is going to text you or email you about how desperate their client is or what kind of price they want or that they need to move on. That is not going in writing. But when you pick up the phone, people are chatty and they'll tell you a lot of stuff that helps you. And so many agents don't do that anymore. I don't know, like they just don't like calling, they like texting. But no, you're not putting the important information in a text. So that's my tangent. We'll bring in Urmi to see if we have any questions before we bring on David.
Hi, everyone. Yes, we do have questions. Let's start with Connie's question. Connie's a longtime participant in our live market session. Hi, Connie. My partner and I are looking for a low-rise home in a desirable community, and we see homes on the market that are asking under 1 million with offer dates, but then they relist their properties to be more than $1 million after the offer date. So how do buyers find value in low-rise homes in desirable communities if prices are sticky? And from Dash, another longtime participant of our session, is the suggestion that maybe fixer-uppers is the thing to focus on. Wondering what all of you think.
Yeah, that's a good point. So yes, if sellers are pricing low and their offer night's failing, they're increasing their price to actually what they want. And if some of them are increasing at a price that is above what they're actually worth, so it's not realistic. Some are relisting at a fair price. So finding value, I think yes, if you're targeting the nicest home that is staged, that hits all the check boxes and, stands out among all the other ones in the neighborhood, it's probably going to be competitive. Like, it's hard to find value with those homes because they're literally the nicest homes every week, right? So if you're looking at good homes that maybe don't show as well, their photos aren't great, it's not staged well. And I don't necessarily mean a home that needs a $400,000 reno, right? But there are a lot of homes where you just change the carpet and paint it, and it actually looks like a completely different property, right? So, and they're sitting on the market longer, and they're priced well, but the seller just wants to move on. So they'll take a lot less, but they're not going to reduce by a lot less. They're going to stay at their high price, but they're willing to take 5 to 10% less than asking just to get off, just to move on. And again, I think this is where, like, calling the agents, this is how you find value. You can't just lob in low balls everywhere. Like, you need to talk to the people to see what the seller's thinking, how motivated they are, act like your clients are interested, but not too interested. And then they give you the information a lot of times. So, I mean, that's what my advice is. And especially as a buyer, you narrow it down to a handful of homes. You have to do that work to see who's flexible, right? And there are people who are selling probably less than what they should because they just want to move on. I don't know if you guys have anything else you want to add, but
yeah, to find value, I mean, you have to ascertain what the actual value is, and then if you can achieve that under that value, that's great. But you have to do that by performing a comparative market analysis, and you got to do some legwork. I mean, your agent's got to do some legwork to get there, and that's how you are going to find value. You're not going to find it just by getting lucky. You got to do some. You got to do the work.
I also want to add that sometimes buyers are confused why homes didn't sell at $1 million and now they want 1.2. And there could be many reasons to it. And one of it could be that, say, this area maybe doesn't have a lot of buyers at the moment, and it takes a bit longer than just 6 marketing days to sell a home. So they may not get any offers on the offer date because they simply didn't have enough showings. Or maybe the listing agent was telling everyone that the expectations are well above the market value, and buyers just got scared and decided to wait it out. There could be many different reasons why a home didn't sell at $1 million, and then they relisted at a high price. And maybe the home is actually worth $1 million, but they just want more. And again, that scared all the buyers. And now they overpriced at 1.2. So it really depends on the situation, and agents need to do an analysis to understand.
Yeah, I know. I was looking at homes this morning in the beach, and like another scenario where you might not get offers is, I mean, we were looking at my clients looking at 3 homes, all like in this 2 mil price point, and all of them have offer nights on this Monday, right?
That's
and this is a classic example where like the home that is the nicest and the most underpriced will probably get all the offers or most of the offers, whereas the other 2 will get none. Not because they're not good homes, but because everyone gravitates to the nicest one that checks off most of the boxes and looks like a good deal, right?
Yeah, that's great reason as well. Yeah.
All right, thank you. I'm going to group 2 questions around condos together because they're slightly different, but they're in some ways the same. So from Carl, we have a question. I want to buy a condo in downtown Toronto. Is now a good time to do so? Yes or no? And some details. Carl's saying, I don't want a small condo, 1,200 feet and above, good location, owner-occupied building, swimming pool. Now, a second question from Chase is, do you think CO1 condos, I think that's the MLS waterfront district, I could be wrong, are good for the very long term as an investment, 1 bedroom, 20 to 30 years time frame. So questions about the condo market. John knows I'm always asking when prices are going to fall because I'm also interested. But yeah, how do you take on these kind of questions from buyers wondering about specifics?
So this is a loaded question. The question of, is this the right time to buy? I'm not even going to answer because I don't know. Like, no one knows where the market is going to go. It's very possible the economy tanks, things slow down, prices dip a little bit in the year ahead. I think the best way to think about it is, especially like this example that they gave where they're looking at buying a larger unit, 1,200 square feet in a predominantly owner-occupied building. And there's like 2 things there that make it stand out, that type of property will probably do better off even if condo prices dip, right? Because as we saw, they're larger units geared towards owner occupiers, not towards investors. And again, when you look at, and I can't remember what I did I do like a video about this? I think I did a video about this on our channel where I talked about strategies for buyers looking at condos. And one of the things I suggested was that you want to look at buildings that are predominantly owner occupied, because when we look at comparables as agents, right, we're not saying, okay, you want to buy a 2-bedroom condo in Corktown or whatever, let's look at all the 2-bedroom condos and what it's worth. You look at comparables in your building, right? And if the comparables in your building, if the building's predominantly larger units, owner occupied, it's probably going to see less downward pressure than a building that has 600 units, 80% of which are under 600 square feet. So if you buy a 2-bedroom unit there, you're going to be dragged down by the stuff that is more likely to see downward pressure, if there is any, right? So again, if it was me and I wanted a condo to live in, I'd probably be less concerned. You just have to go in knowing, yeah, maybe prices are going to dip I don't know, X% over the next little while. But if you're buying for the long term, you'll probably be fine. And then the follow-up question, buying like a 1+10 or something downtown. Again, like this is a market where it's slow. I mean, if I'm buying a condo downtown that's 1+, I'm trying to get value. Like at the end of the day, you're trying to get a slight discount below market to kind of price in and get a little bit of value. Are they more vulnerable in the short term? 100%. Like this is the segment that is probably the most oversupplied. To the question, will they hold their value in 20 years? Yeah, probably. Like I think what we're experiencing now is not a permanent slowdown in our economy and housing market. There's like all these externalities kind of impacting it. But yeah, 10 years from now, the market's going to look very different, right? But again, it's not talking about timing it. Like the price may very well be lower in 6 months. I have no idea, right? But if you're talking about long term, sure. But if you're buying again, you want to look for value. And even if you're buying the 1+10, try to buy in a building that is, like I said, more owner occupied, more mid-rise or low-rise, not in a tower with like 400 rentals, right? So that's what I would be doing.
Yeah, even if it is for investment, don't just follow where all the other investors went. Go somewhere where you can see some appreciation above your likely negative cash flow for the short term. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys.
Before we go, the other questions I'll get after. Anastasia Dash is saying they have the same painting as you in their that you have in your background. I hope you weren't told that was an original.
No, my husband got it on a great sale in HomeSense.
Gotcha. All right. Looking good. Okay, thanks.
All right.
Everyone else, I'll hold your questions to the end of the next segment. Thank you.
All right. Thank you,
Bye.
Anastasia. Thanks, Davin.
See you again.
Mr. Larock, we're starting a little later than usual. We were very chatty this month.
That's okay.
Beautiful, but thank you for joining. I honestly don't even know where do we start. I feel like every 3 days things are moving. Obviously, we saw the massive tariff announcements, including in unoccupied islands that are occupied only by penguins, apparently are getting 30% tariffs, but complete insanity. I mean, I don't know any expert or economist who can make sense of what the US is doing, but now we're in a pause, 90 days. So I guess my question is, how do you see this impacting? And you talked about this in your last couple of articles, but has anything changed with the 90 days? Monetary policy, the Federal Reserve, Bank of Canada, how are they responding when we think about interest rates to all of this volatility? Because we talked about last month, they have this tension between both a slowing economy and potentially higher inflation. So, what is kind of the outlook right now?
Okay, so let's just do a quick recap. So first of all, when Trump announced the tariffs on all the other countries, Canada went from being one of the only countries the US trades with that had tariffs, because we have the steel and aluminum tariffs, and we also have automotive tariffs. Overnight, all these other countries got hit with massive tariffs, and suddenly Canada had a competitive advantage as far as having lower tariffs than other countries on average, because all of the stuff covered under CUSMA, some people call it the USMCA. It's basically the new NAFTA agreement. All of the stuff covered under NAFTA was exempt from additional tariffs. So when all the other tariffs were announced, Canada suddenly had a tariff advantage. Then Trump put a 90-day pause on all the tariffs for the other countries, but Canada still has the steel tariffs and the car tariffs. So we now are once again disadvantaged in our trade with the US, and we face higher tariffs than all the countries that Trump hit pause on. And here's my take on Trump, okay? I'm sorry if this sounds political, although I don't think it should, because I don't think you can tell someone's political leanings by how they feel about Trump. What he's doing, very clearly to me, he's a grifter, right? He launched a meme coin the day before he was sworn in as president. He has proven himself to be as crooked as you can be. And when you slap tariffs on countries, you can make lots of side deals and you can graft. So if you're Vietnam and one-third of your exports go to the US, and sorry, one-third of your GDP is based on exports to your US, exports to the US, you have to take whatever deal you can get. And if you see a couple of Trump hotels popping up in Vietnam, and suddenly Vietnam doesn't have to pay the stupid tariffs that never should have been put in place anyway, then there's your answer. So in terms of making sense of this, the tariffs make no sense, but I think the motivation is clear. Creating the murkiness of a tariff world where side deals are being made all the time allows a grifter to grift. And that ultimately, you can talk about his four-dimensional chess and get smart people to try to explain what his real rationale is. As far as I'm concerned, it's that simple, right? The simplest explanation is usually the best one. He's always been a grifter, and this is a way to muddy the waters enough and to create pain for counterparties where you can then go in and extract all kinds of concessions to feather your nest. And that's what's happening. So Canada briefly had a tariff advantage over other tariffed countries. And this pause on a relative basis is not good news for Canada because we now, once again, have more tariffs than other countries. Interestingly, the US's biggest three trade partners, Canada, Mexico, China, have the most tariffs levied against them right now. China, by far, with all of this back and forth. And good for China, by the way, and the EU and Canada for standing up to the US and saying, we'll have counter tariffs, because Trump is saying, I'm going to punch you in the face. And if you punch me in the face back, I'll be really upset. And it's like, hey, dude, that's not how it works. You want to slap tariffs on us? We're gonna retaliate. And China is going to call his bluff and say, we don't think the U.S. economy will take the pain. And the Chinese are far more used to taking economic pain. And quite frankly, they don't have a choice because they live in a dictatorship, or they have an authoritarian government. And they're calling Trump's bluff. So this is all going to be very interesting, but it's not easy on markets. There's tons of volatility. So what does this mean? Well, that chart you showed for consumer confidence, business confidence is the same. Businesses aren't going to invest. Consumers are pulling in their reins. Interestingly, the Canadian economy is much better able to withstand economic disruption. We have a very high savings rate based on historical averages, and our government did not blow its brains out on fiscal stimulus and spending. The US government has been running massive deficits, which they've really never seen before, except in the most severe recessions.
Yeah.
And they don't have a lot of dry powder. And Trump is trying to pass budget cuts, attached. He's trying to pass a budget with tax cuts in the midst of all of this economic disruption. So I think the U.S. economy is in for a rough ride. The Fed has said thus far that it thinks that, well, first of all, it said it thought the tariffs were worse than it had anticipated, and it thought the effects would be more magnified than it had anticipated as a result. The comments from Fed Chair Powell have led the market to believe that rate cuts by the Fed are not going to be forthcoming. The market thinks there will be rate cuts coming, but it doesn't think they will be forthcoming. The Bank of Canada meets next Wednesday, and the market didn't think that the bank was going to cut by another quarter point next week. Then we got a really weak employment report, and it showed signs that the economy was slowing and that businesses had stopped hiring. And ultimately, it was a bad report. We had full-time job reductions. We had lots of job losses in the private sector. The only silver lining for the Bank of Canada is that average wages fell. They've been growing faster than inflation for quite a while, and that concerned the bank. With average wages falling now and labor costs falling, the risk that we would see sharply higher inflation is reduced. That said, originally inflation expectations had only gone up over the short term. So the bank measures inflation expectations on 3 timelines: short term, medium term, long term. Short term inflation expectations really took off last month. And Governor Macklem said, we're mostly concerned with medium and long-term expectations because that's when inflation expectations really take root and change behavior. If you think there's going to be more inflation in the future and you buy more today, that expectation of higher inflation in the future creates more inflation in the present.
Mhm.
In the most recent inflation surveys, we're now seeing that inflation expectations in the medium term are starting to accelerate as well, and that will concern the bank. And the bank has said that that will be important to its monetary policy decision making. I don't know if the bank's going to cut next week. I mean, who knows? Tell me what Trump's going to do tomorrow morning. I mean, he doesn't even know, right? Well, I don't know when he rolls out of bed, but he doesn't know 10 minutes between when he rolls out of bed and picks up his phone to tweet on his Truth Social account. He doesn't know what he's going to do. So I don't think any of us should be overly confident. I will say the bank, during the last economic crisis, during COVID, Governor Polas said the bank will err on the side of doing too much rather than too little because we have more tools to rein in too much inflation as opposed to too little. And he uttered the famous line, "A fireman has never been criticized for using too much water." So I think the bank has an easing bias. Its policy rate right now is at 2.75. Right in the middle of its neutral range. So when we talk about the Bank Canada's policy rate, it has three positions. Either it's restricting growth in the economy, like the bank is hitting a brake on a car. It's in neutral, like a car literally idling at the side of the road in neutral, not going forward or backwards. Or it can stimulate growth by pushing the gas pedal. And the bank won't be stimulating growth until its policy rate gets to 2%. And it's done that in 5 of the bank's last 5 rate cut cycles going back more than 25 years. So I think we're getting to 2%, and so does the market. The timing of when that happens, I know everybody loves to, it's fun to speculate on what the bank might do. So, of course, everybody wants to know now, is the bank going to cut next week? Everybody's waiting with bated breath. But it's not going to make much difference whether the bank cuts next week or the meeting after. The reality is, they're still going to cut, and most people think that they're going to get to at least 2%. If we go below that, it'll be because the economy is getting hammered, and we come back to that warning that just because rates go down doesn't mean house prices will go up. And you talked about that, and I mentioned it as well. The idea that during the financial crisis and during COVID, rates went down and house prices went up, but we didn't get an economic shock either of those times. And if rates go below 2%, if the Bank Canada's policy rate goes below 2% this time, we're definitely getting a shock. So there's the lay of the land. Fed, probably market thinks Fed will cut, but Fed says they're in no hurry. Trump's a grifter and everything's going to be totally unpredictable. And we just have to live in his volatile world, right? It's his world right now. We're all just living in it. And the Bank of Canada has a cutting bias, certainly going forward. The expectation is they'll continue to cut. The timing of when that'll happen is less certain. I think, John, I'll give you a spoiler alert for this week's post. I think they're going to cut next week. It's not a confident call, but all else being equal, I think the bank still wants to be cautious. And unlike in the U.S., where all of what's happening is a self-inflicted wound, we didn't ask for this fight, but we're in it. And ultimately, I think the bank would rather err on using too much water than not enough, just like a fireman.
That's fair. Before I bring Urmi on, I'll kind of ask you just one last question. What is your outlook and what is going on? So we talked about the Bank of Canada potentially cutting to 2% maybe by this year, which will impact variable rates. What is going on with fixed rates? I mean, we've seen some volatility in bond yields. So, a month from now, do we think fixed rates are going to be lower? Or what is the kind of the outlook on the fixed rate market?
So we would expect something really interesting has happened, because when the stock market tanks, normally bond yields go down. Basically, people buy bonds. It's called a flight to safety. The demand for bonds goes up, their yields go down. Fixed rates move in the same direction as yields, so normally that would cause fixed rates to drop. And we saw that last week. Yields hit the lowest level they've seen in quite a while. But this time, what's interesting is yields have gone the other way. They've gone up, and that's putting upward pressure on fixed rates. So normally, when the stock market is tanking because people expect economic weakness, the silver lining should be that bond yields fall and fixed mortgage rates drop. Right now, they're going the other way. Now, lots of speculation about why that's happening. Some people think bond market vigilantes have had enough of the fact the US is running massive deficits. They're trying to pass a budget with tax cuts in the middle of all of this economic strife when we've already had the US economy has already had massive stimulus. Tax cuts would just be another form of stimulus. Some people say that there was a short position on US Treasuries that had to be covered by a large Japanese investment fund. Some people are speculating China owns a ton of US Treasuries, and some people think that maybe China, in part of their retaliation for what Trump is doing, is demonstrating that if they want to flood the market with US Treasuries, they can push US Treasury yields higher to the detriment of the US economy. And maybe this is a power move by China. It's hard to say. But what we can say is what would normally happen is not happening. There's an anomaly right now. And the bottom line is fixed rates will go in the same direction as yields, and yields are going up right now. Intuition would suggest they should be going down, but the reality is they're going the other way. We will find out a little bit farther down the road, I think, what caused them to go higher, but it's not entirely clear yet. The bottom line is, John, if you want a fixed rate soon, you should be locking in because there's upward pressure on them now. Again, counterintuitively, but no denying, if yields go higher, so will fixed rates.
All right. So call David Larock, lock in your fixed rate if you're looking at buying a home. And on that note, we'll bring Urmi back on and maybe take a few more questions before we wrap up.
Hi, Dave.
Hi.
I think you've actually answered all the interest rate questions. Maybe one question, paraphrasing Carl's question a bit here. Any chance that knowing the outcome of the Canadian election, whichever way it goes, the federal election, adds a little bit of stability in Canada in terms of market outlook, or is it just really the waves from the south that are going to matter?
Well, markets like certainty, and the election is creating uncertainty. So I think once that is clarified, the market will like having that made more clear. But if you're waiting until after the election, be careful what you wish for, because we might have an election with a minority government and it might not actually be clear what the direction of the federal government will be. So markets like certainty, that's a general rule. Will the election bring more certainty? Hard to say. We'll find out.
Yeah, and I don't listen. I agree. The markets want some certainty and clarity, but I don't think. And I've had people ask me this, whether they should wait to sell or buy after. I don't think the housing market's changing after April 28th or whenever our election is. Like, yeah, it might be a little bit better. We might get some clarity, but I think most of the uncertainty is actually south of the border rather than domestic. So we'll see how it all plays out.
I think that's about it. I mean, speaking of uncertainty here too, we have a question from Mr. Potato Head about housing values if Alberta separates. I think there's a level of discomfort and uncertainty here as well on certain issues. So obviously, I don't think that's answerable.
I would say this: if Alberta separates, then all bets are off. The economy would be devastated, and it would be, I mean, if we're talking about outlier risks, and let's just hope it doesn't happen, because if it does, would you buy a house right now if you knew that Alberta was going to separate from Canada? No.
I mean, the polls are showing 30% saying that if a certain election outcome happens in Canada. I mean, that's a lot lower than the biggest separation risk we've ever faced in Quebec. So I'm not sure the polls are there.
And I think for those who aren't familiar with what we're talking about, I think this has come up. I think Preston Manning wrote an op-ed, which I'm going to paraphrase. I think it was basically vote conservative or we're separating, basically, or we're separating, which is, I think, is kind of point, which obviously he got criticized for. But yeah, that is the I think Albertans would be very upset if a liberal government.
Yeah, but the poll numbers are interesting on that question. So not sure we're in that really high percentage territory. The closest we've ever gotten, the polls were very high. Yeah. Very, very high.
Yeah, there's a difference between what the polls say and how people show up on voting day. And I think separating from Canada, I mean, I would hope that people would think long and hard about whether or not they want to join the US.
Well,
Well,
different views across the country, but I think we'll leave it there. I think that just to be frank, even that those questions coming up just underscore how much instability we're facing
exactly.
Domestically and
Well, yeah, listen, I
I'm
think
getting a comment here. Can we end this on a little bit of a sunnier note? We're ending in a bit of an apocalypse now situation. What can we do? How about this? Final comment.
You know
What
what?
can we do as consumers if we're looking to get into the housing market or we're looking to time our moves? Are there things we can do to do those buy safely if we want to?
Yeah,
Let's just end on
100%.
that note
I
because
think,
there's a
listen, I
question
think
about
it's a
that.
more challenging market. I think you need to be careful about how you navigate it. I mean, and the interesting thing is, I mean, I've heard a couple of people, like a couple of new clients, talking about their terrible stories of past people, agents that they work with. Because, like I said, I mean, a lot of agents are terrible, and it's really interesting because there are a lot of great people in our industry. We see them when we work with them, and we can kind of tell who like the great professionals are. And I think that's what you want to be striving for and looking for, because there are people who are going to be doing the work, not just lobbying in offers, not just doing nothing, and acting like it's 2021 still. So I think that's what you want to be striving for when you're looking at, because this market's more about negotiation and tactics and strategies, and whether you're working with the seller or the buyer. And I think that's what you need to be looking for, and getting great mortgage advice. I mean, David obviously is kind of one of the most knowledgeable people I can think of on the market. And, this is why we like bringing him on, because in a volatile market, what you need as a consumer is knowledge, quite frankly. So that's what I would be striving for if I was kind of looking at buying and selling. Yeah.
Urmi, since I was negative on my last comment, let me end on a positive note too. Simply that history has shown the best time to buy is when others are fearful, right? Sell when others are greedy and buy when others are fearful. I'm not saying now's going to be a great time to buy if you want to sell in 2 or 3 years, but one of the questions we had was from a guy who had a 20 to 30-year time horizon. I will say this with confidence. If you buy right now and you own the house for 20 or 30 years, the price when you sell 20 or 30 years from now will be much higher than the price you bought at today. And I suspect over a long enough time horizon that we will look back and say that this was a buying opportunity. Again, not for speculators and not for short-term returns, but as my dad once said to me when I was agonizing over buying a house in 2003, because I was sure the housing market was overvalued at that point. He said, if you buy a good asset at a fair price and you own it for a long time, chances are you'll be happy with your investment. And we were.
Beautiful. We've brought up the sun here, and we are in the middle of a shaky spring. Yes. It was cloudy for a bit. Now the sun's out. The very Canadian spring. We'll end there. Beautiful. Hopefully that answers Viswanath's question about whether it's a good time to step in. The good advice from Dave and John. Thank you all, viewers, for joining us. If we didn't get your question, you can find contacts for Dave and John in our show notes. Reach out to them by email.